Okay, I would now like to call to order the March 1st, 2023 meeting of the Indiana State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bess.
Present.
Ms. DeLosa.
Here.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Here.
Mr. Gastineau.
Here.
Ms. Hemmel.
Here.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Renschler.
Here.
Mr. Watts.
Here.
Dr. Jenner.
Here.
Thank you.
Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the February 1st, 2023 meeting?
Motion.
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So, good morning, everyone. I don't know about you, but it is March. Sometimes January and February for our schools are, well, heck, for our schools, for even our parents and families, they're those long months. So it seems like when we get to March, we start to see the opportunity to show what students have learned. Spring break's around the corner, and it's going to be 71 degrees today. All great things. Before we get started, I do want to recognize the Butler University pre-students who are attending the meeting today. If you could please stand, our future teachers. I understand that you've already been recruited by a couple people in this room. Mr. Mapes is the biggest culprit, I understand, trying to recruit, but we're so glad to welcome you to the best profession in the world, the education profession, where every day you can make a difference on individuals, your community, your state, and beyond. So glad to have you. And our Assistant Dean and Senior Lecturer at the College of Education, Angela Mager, I'm so glad to have you here as well. Thank you for always being a loyal supporter and bringing our students. Since we last met, we also named Indiana's third Milken Award-winning educator since 2017. Mrs. Brittany Tinkler is a second grade teacher at Rosa Parks Elementary School in Perry Township. We surprised her 3 weeks ago, and only a few people were in on the surprise when we arrived. They told Mr. Mapes, even though I was like, I don't know if he should know early. He might spill it. They told Mr. Mapes, the principal, and others, but it was such an exciting opportunity to recognize yet another Indiana teacher with a national award. And one of the most special things is when you hand over that $25,000 check. It's powerful, and what an expression she had when she received that award. Mrs. Tinkler, in her address, it was kind of amazing, just as a teacher is. She was very impromptu, like able to take the situation easily, because teachers do that every day. And she talked about the importance of asking questions, and in particular asking why, to help students find their purpose. So again, congratulations, Mrs. Tinkler. We also announced the recipients of the Comprehensive School Counseling Grant. This went to 26 schools across 17 counties and will impact over 117,000 Indiana students. The grant provides additional support for schools as they work to implement the comprehensive counseling model, specifically focused on lowering counselor to student ratios, improving student outcomes as it pertains to the 5 Indiana GPS characteristics, establishing and strengthening partnerships locally, and then progress monitoring the results. Today we'll hear updates from Ron Sandlin, who's going to provide an early look at the results we're seeing of the statewide impact of the Student Learning Recovery grants. And then we'll hear from 2 grant recipients specifically. We'll hear from Brandon Brown, the CEO of the Mind Trust, who will share a little bit more about the impact of the summer learning labs in Marion County. We'll also hear from Jacqueline Kronk, the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of St. Joseph County, so far up north, about the Strive program that they launched. So really looking forward to hearing from them. And then finally, we'll hear from Dr. Nancy Holsapple, our Director of Special Education, who will give us an update on the trends in the special education count data. So on that note, any other board member comments or reports? Dr. Ernest.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a report. We really haven't talked about this, and next time we're going to have a discussion, which I'll talk about here in just a second. But National Association of State Boards of Education had recruited and awarded members $10,000 each from the members of Indiana, Georgia, District of Columbia, and Guam in a grant around healthy school facilities. And so we've got started in that. That grant came from the Joyce Family Foundation, and it has been going on, and it really started around drinking water, but now has expanded, as we know, to lots of other things that affect from a facility standpoint. But really, it's a great cross-state collaboration, but it also is to build a shared understanding of the role that the physical learning environments have on the state of health of our students, as well as the academic piece of that as well. And so it's really enhanced the communication. Our team in Indiana is made up of the Indiana Finance Authority, the Department of Environmental Management, the Indiana Department of Health, the Department of Education, which I get to work with Stephen Balco on your team, and I love working with him, and a shout out to him because we're really kind of co-leading this. And then State Board of Education, we have local school superintendents that are a part of our network group, as well as school board members as well. And so really, our goal has become, from having conversations already with all of those cross agencies, has been how can we get a repository of where all this information can be on indoor air quality, drinking water, land environmental, student health, where particularly superintendents can go, because it's interesting when we've talked to the superintendents and we have them in the room with some of these departments, they're saying things and it's like, well, I didn't know that was out there, right? Or I didn't know that you'd sent a letter on that, or have missed that. So it's how do we, it's almost like marketing, if you will, right? How do we know that those things are out there? So one reason why I wanted to give this report and build a little hype, if you will, is I had the opportunity through our network to get to know, and she worked with all the states the last time that we were all together. Dr. Erica Eatland, who is director of the Human Experience at the lab, Human Experiences Lab at Perkins and Will, and she's basically she's a researcher that really has dug into the impact of what facilities and what that environment is like for the students, right? And so for the first time, we're getting some pretty interesting data on what's it mean if our classrooms are above 75 degrees, for example, or in an uncomfortable state. And you're nodding your head, Greg, because we've all been there, right? When that has happened. And what's that do? And so that really triggered in me these thoughts of, gosh, we're spending millions, as we should, on science of reading and these things. But if we're not at the same time looking at what are those facilities like, and I always like talking to Pat about this because it's like, we don't need palaces, we just need facilities that work, right? And that really has been this prompt for me. So that being said, to finish this up, why does that all matter? Next board meeting on the 12th of April, that day, we're gonna, at 8 in the morning, we're gonna have an information session for legislators with Dr. Eatland. And then we're gonna have a discussion in the board meeting, and then that afternoon, our group is going to meet, and we'd invite everybody to that as well. So Butler students, if you find this riveting today, it will be even more riveting next time around facilities. You're all invited. So that was my report.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ernest. Any other board member comments or reports? Yes, sir.
You know, when
Mr.
you
Mapes.
visit Rosa Parks to give Brittany her award, you had a book that you showed all the kids.
Yes,
Ada Twist the Scientist.
yes.
And so I purchased for her class that book. And then she's signed and put a personal message in each book for every kid, so they also remember the day that their teacher was identified as one of the best teachers in the United States. So just
That's
wanted you to
awesome.
know that. So
Thank you, Pat, for sharing that. Ada Twist, scientist. We get no proceeds by saying that multiple times as a board, but that is an excellent, excellent book about why students should ask questions. So very cool that those students will always have that memory just like their teacher. So thank you for sharing that. Very good, Pat. Any other board member comments and reports? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment, and I would invite Lavetta Tyndall. Oh, she will, okay. Michaela Spangenberg. Did I say that right, Michaela? Yes. Oh, good, good, perfect, thank you.
First times my name has been properly pronounced. Thank you.
Good.
My name is Dr. Michaela Spangenberg. I'm here from Gary, Indiana. And I am a facilitator of an action-focused group called the Gary Education Coalition. It's been a couple of years since I have spoken before this body specifically, although I've encountered many of you in other forums. And the last time that I came before this body to speak was before the vote that turned Roosevelt back over to the DUAB-controlled, MGT-managed school corporation. And prior to that, myself and other community members warned that that school would be closed if it was handed back over, and indeed it was. And we warned that our educational system was failing under the DUAB takeover and the MGT managed takeover, and indeed it still is. And today we have one high school that has less students in it than the school that was closed those years ago when I came before you and spoke last time. Today we're confronted with a different crisis, which is that we have SB 327 to go before Ways and Means perhaps sometime during this legislative session. In its current form, it will put us under an indefinite state control. And of course, we have nothing against Dr. Jenner, who we've had wonderful interactions with in the past. But what we've learned from the takeover is that any period of time in which there's no mechanisms for accountability, in which there's no transparency, in which the public has no ability to elect its officials, results in a downturn, a steep downturn for our schools and our children. Frankly, our children cannot read at this point. And were it not for a vast majority, seemingly, of our students sitting on Edmonton, which was previously known as Plato, at the high school level, our graduation rates would also be steeply declining. It seems like the majority of our students are actually in credit recovery at this point instead of in high school. Our hope, and I know that when we've come before this board before, there's been kind of, you know, in years past, maybe this attitude of, well, this is really outside of our purview, this is a DUAB problem, this is a state legislation problem, but our hope is that somehow the state can work together within itself and in concert with the community to come up with a better solution than this. You know, this bill is called a transitional bill, but there's really no transition. It simply hands our school corporation from one part of the state to another part of the state. There's no endpoint of a return to local control. And initially, when our school corporation was taken over, we were told, well, once you hit these 4 criteria, what will happen is it will be turned back over to the governing body, and then our governing body was dissolved. So at this point, what we need is for the reality of what's happening in this state to return to the stated intent, and for us to have an endpoint that comes back to local control, and for the people here to do what they can to influence that process. Because unfortunately, when it comes to the education of our children, what should be guiding us is data, but also ethics. Unfortunately, a lot of what we see now guiding the education of our children is ideology and people's personal opinions about whether elected boards should exist, or people's personal dislike of somebody who was in office back in 2018. And when that's what the focus is, what gets lost is our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spangenberg. Next, we have Kendra Johnson. Good morning.
Good morning to each and every one of you. When I appeared before you last month, I talked about Black history and how it should be celebrated 365 days of the year. This time, I come before you reporting on going to the National ESEA Conference that was held right here in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, first, I would be remiss not to thank the citizens of Gary, Indiana, for being kind enough to sponsor the $700 registration fee to attend this conference. And one of the things I've always appreciated about going to conferences is meeting and seeing individuals who might be challenged with some of the same challenges you're facing, and also to meet individuals who have become experts in their field or in their area. My biggest reason for wanting to go was because of the training from the U.S. Department of Education. And thankfully, at first I said, $700, oh my gosh, this is a lot. But this year, they made it a hybrid conference where you could be in person and also virtually. And they also fixed it where for the next 3 months, all of the attendees would have access to all of the workshops to go over again and to study. And had I known about this conference earlier, I would have submitted a workshop as well, which would have been how parents, educators, and administrators could work together to guarantee the success of a child. Some of the workshops I attended were the U.S. Department of Education updates, U.S. Department Program Leadership Panel. I got a chance to meet with Kirk Russell, the 2022 National Teacher of the Year. I also attended a workshop, If You Can't Teach Me, You Can't Reach Me, making connections that increase achievement, as well as a workshop by Horatio Sanchez, Overcoming the Impact of Poverty on the Brain, ESEA Compliance Concerns and Best Practices, and a workshop concerning reading. But one of the things I found most interesting was talking to all the attendees and running into a former individual that used to work for the Gary Community School Corporation, Dr. Albert Holmes. So now, what is the next step? Well, number 2, doing more study. But number 3, going back to Gary, Indiana, and holding workshops with parents concerning Title I, parental rights, and working with any educator that would like to form that bridge in partnership with parents so that the children that are in their institutions can not only survive, but thrive and succeed. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Kendra. Lavetta Tyndall. Good morning.
Thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome.
Yeah. My name is Mrs. Lavetta Tyndall. I am a tax-paying resident and property owner in the city of Gary, Indiana. And my children graduated from the were educated through the Gary school system. And Madam Secretary and other board members, several meetings ago, Madam Secretary, you used the phrase partnering with parents as a matter of fact in the course of educating our students. How do you plan for parents of the Gary Community School Corporation to be regarded as partners by the MGT administration currently ruining and crippling our students and discounting our parents? At a GCSC meeting last night, 6 MGT employees sat in the front of the audience. There were a total of about 42 people present. 5 students performed a Temptations tune of the 60s. 12 students rendered the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Where were the parents? How were they notified about their children's engagement in the program last evening? How much contact is there with the parents of the students in these school systems? What evidence is there of MGT and the Gary Community School Corporation's administration partnering with parents, welcoming parents, encouraging parental involvement in their children's education? When will the bus service become adequate for our children, where they can rely on the buses to pick them up and drop them off in a timely fashion related to the schedule of their school classes? When will e-learning become adequate? That is, Chromebooks that are in the hands of every student, functioning Chromebooks. When will Chromebooks and the support system for the use of those Chromebooks and the e-learning exercises that are taking place or scheduled to take place? When will the safety of our children be a standard and be ensured? When will the innocence of our children be protected? When will humane treatment and respect be the norm and the standard for our children? There is so much that is lacking under the current arrangement in the takeover of our school system. We are pushing for an elected school board. We want direct contact with the people that run our schools. We want favorable, respectful interaction with those persons that will be running our schools and leading our children. We want an educational system that will prepare our children to be globally competitive, successfully. And the route that we're taking now, the present arrangement that has been made for us is not working. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Tyndall. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
The motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I'd now like to transition to a couple of presentations that I mentioned. Mr. Sandlin, I believe we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenner. I'm excited to share the podium today, both in person and virtually, with 2 of our fantastic partners leading amazing work around the state of Indiana related to the Student Learning Recovery Grant Program. So I'll try to be brief in my comments and provide a high-level summary of some of the findings and the work that we're doing at the state level. So I'll start off by giving an overview of just ultimately where the program ended up from a design standpoint and the amount of grant awards that we issued, give some initial findings around program participation, and then what I find the most exciting, highlight some preliminary findings from our return on investment or student impact analyses that are taking place. So many of you know the HEA 1008 passed in 2021 on April 29th. The Department of Education worked expeditiously to turn around grant awards by the beginning of June. And if you do the math on that, I believe that's a 4-week turnaround on a $150 million grant program in the midst of one of the most tumultuous times in SEA education administration, which please, we don't need a crown because there were people around the state facing the same exact tumultuous situations. And in doing so, we were able to prioritize some particular focus areas, mainly literacy, math, and college and career readiness, design the application and the general program to target those students we know were most significantly impacted by the disruptions caused by the pandemic, promote partnerships between school corporations and local community organizations to enhance the wraparound support that students are receiving, not just within the school system, but outside the school system as well, as we approach this with an all-hands-on-deck response to an unprecedented emergency. And finally, from the very beginning, we've committed to collecting important data around student participation so that we could eventually, and you'll see preliminary results today, analyze the return on investment of this program, and then use that information to inform future investments. So as I mentioned, quick summary of program design. We ended up actually facilitating 3 rounds of applications. The first round is what I just mentioned from June 2021, where we issued both 1-year awards and then 2-year awards. Those 2-year awards span the full time period we were allotted by the General Assembly, and the 1-year applicants self-selected to only apply for 1 year's worth of grants. With extra money and a little bit more intentionality, we launched round 2, which opened the opportunity. Because of that quick turnaround, we knew some organizations were unable to submit an application. So we actually opened up a new application windows for those folks who may have been interested the first round, but were unable to submit an application, so new applicants were able to apply. And those 1-year applicants who were demonstrating some initial success could petition for a 2nd year of funding. You'll actually hear from one of those applicants today, the Indy Summer Learning Labs. And then finally, because we heard a lot of feedback from some of our fully funded 2-year grantees that they were really having an impact on students, we launched a 3rd round, which provided those fully funded 2-year applicants a chance to supplement their initial award with 10% additional funding to expand their programming over the remainder of the grant period. And you can see the timelines for each of those. And I'll pause here very quickly. This intentional program design would not have been possible without the amazing, incredible work of my colleagues at the Department of Education, one of which is here with me today, Brittany Springston, is in the audience. Her, along with a very small team of dedicated public servants, committed an overwhelming amount of their time, energy, and capacity to ensuring that these resources were effectively, strategically, and intentionally distributed around the state, and continue to do so to support each of our grant applicants to ensure that the execution of the grant matches as closely as possible the intentional design of the grant. So thank you, Brittany, and to all of her colleagues at the department. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge their incredible work. So across the 3 rounds, we wanted to publicly share information, and we released this in a report to the Legislative Service Agency back in November of 2022. You can see the distributions by round. You can see the different types of grants that were awarded. And ultimately, I want to flag 2 things on this. First, that 190 awardees will include some duplicates, right? As you can imagine, when we supplement an existing award, that is an additional grant award, but it's the same recipient, right? So we're around 110 total recipients. And you'll also see that because round 2 included so many high-quality applications, we supplemented the initial $150 million from the state with some ESSER federal COVID relief funds to ensure that we were able to provide funding to every high-quality program that submitted an application. And we're really excited about the initial results and the initial findings of student participation. In year one alone, 1008 Student Learning Recovery Grant Program served over 51,000 students around the state. Over 300 partners came together across 86 counties to provide comprehensive wraparound, both in-school and out-of-school services. And based on that round one award total and the number of students we served, we know we awarded just over $2,000 per student, which is a significant investment and is what it's going to take, a sustained investment at those levels to ensure that we meet the needs, the unprecedented needs that are resulting from the disruptions of COVID-19. We're also finding that the intentional design of the program to target those students who were most significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic are successful, excuse me. Across the state, 1008 programs disproportionately serve students from low-income families, which, as we know, several reports have come out about access to supplementary education services and how high-income families are accessing additional tutoring support for their families on their own dime, creating an opportunity or a risk of an expansion of an achievement gap. This is one piece of addressing that access issue that will ultimately lead to limiting the impact of COVID-19 on the students impacted the most. And across all additional subgroups that our data show were most significantly impacted outside of Hispanic, 1008 Student Learning Recovery Grant Program served a greater percentage compared to those students in similar grades statewide. And finally, a quick preliminary analysis of some return on investment findings. So we are really excited, and the IDOE is committed to investigating the impact of every single, to the extent possible, COVID relief dollars, federal and state, that are sent out to address the emergency needs that we've all identified. To my knowledge, and I've been at the state now for about a decade, this is really the first statistical analysis, program-specific statistical analysis, that the department has embarked on to really dig into return on investment, a very intentional program design. And the analysis focuses on student growth percentiles at the iLearn level. And I want to flag something very, very important here. We're basing this on iLearn, which is one piece of data. You'll hear from two partners today, but all of our partners around the state are collecting locally developed data as well on their programs specifically. And I want to let you all know, and I encourage everyone who's listening to view these state-level data in conjunction and to complement that local data to paint a whole picture about the impact we're having on students. There are limitations to our analysis of iLearn data that I think anyone can identify, but that doesn't mean that this is not really a really important analysis. So we're analyzing student growth, which shows a rate of learning. So we have a rate of learning that was pre-pandemic, right? The pandemic happened and we saw a significant suppression in the rate of learning in 2021. That's just before 1008 launched. And then we have 2022 rates of learning. Our analysis compares 2021 to 2022. And by looking at the difference between those two, we can measure acceleration, right? So we know that the rate of learning based on, as measured by student growth percentile, was suppressed in 2021 as a result of the disruptions. We reviewed that data. That's the impact data that's been presented to this board. When we compare 2022 and see the difference, that will help us identify the acceleration of learning. And again, this is the Student Learning Recovery Grant. We're looking to accelerate learning beyond the impact of COVID-19 and even pre-pandemic rates. So we're really looking at that acceleration piece. And we're also going to compare the acceleration of non-participants to participants. And I'm going to highlight some quick initial findings. Again, the folks from each program will present additional findings to complement this information. So statewide, we are seeing academic acceleration between 2021, 22 across the board. That is to be expected, again, because 2021 rates were so significantly impacted by the disruptions caused by COVID-19. However, the blue chart on the left shows participants in 1008 data, and the red box and whisker plot shows non-participants. You'll see that the rate of acceleration for each was about the same. We are going to release full statewide analysis this summer, so these are just initial preliminary findings, but we're not seeing across the board broad statistically significant acceleration from the 1008 program as a whole. But when we dig into very specific programs, we are seeing some really, really significant bright spots. And so again, as we continue our analysis, we'll continue investigating more individual programs. But the one program that we have shared publicly, and we shared this back in November, is the Indy Summer Learning Labs, which you'll hear about today. As you can see on your screen for ELA, the Indy Summer Learning Labs rate of acceleration was significantly higher, and that is determined by the data scientists that conducted this study, than other students in Indianapolis who did not participate in the program, but are in similar grades. The same story happens with mathematics. We see far greater acceleration in mathematics statewide because we also saw significantly more impact in mathematics, if you can recall those presentations that you've had in the past. But again, on the statewide side, when we look at program participation, the full 51,000 students, we are unable to determine a significant impact up or down of 1008 programs statewide. But when we dig into specific programming, specifically here the Indy Summer Learning Labs, we again see significant impact for similar students who participated in the 1008 program and those who did not. And again, as I mentioned, you'll hear from two programs today, both of which we've publicly released the Indy Summer Learning Labs, but we are continuing to analyze individual programs, including the Boys and Girls Club of St. Joseph's County. And our initial findings are showing significant results there as well, although we're just not prepared to share all of the findings at this point. That should come around June or this summer. And so ultimately, our reflection on these early findings is there might be some aspects of the program that limit the statewide analysis. For example, we had very large programs dedicated to building students' college and career readiness, specifically high school students who we know are a year or two away from exiting our K-12 system, and those investments really layered into not only supporting academics, but they really got into career exploration, career counseling, and completing credentials so that when they exited our system in this crazy time, they were as prepared as possible, right? That's not going to be captured in our statewide analysis, which is why it's so important that we dig in individually and identify those programs that we can scale statewide to bring the success that's happening in places like St. Joseph's County and Indianapolis to more students around our state. So a quick summary, we've successfully targeted those students who were most significantly impacted without systematically including anyone, right? I want to make sure there is no eligibility criteria on this. This was an intentional program design. Again, statewide analyses are ongoing, findings released this summer. We are finding promising results from our iLearn data, our most reliable, statistically reliable data that we have, but we do encourage everyone to view these data in conjunction with the local data that you'll hear about today. And then finally, the department, as you can see from our commitment and the analyses that we've undertaken to date, is committed to identifying what is working, and then being very intentional and strategic in investing future resources towards expanding those programs that are working, identifying the principles of successful programs and replicating those to the fullest extent possible, recognizing the differences in context around the state, of course, to enhance outcomes for all students, so that where you live and access to a high-quality program doesn't mean that you have a benefit or an advantage over a student who might not geographically live around or near that program. So that's all I have, and I'll kick it over to Brandon unless there's questions or comments from you all.
Yeah, while Brandon is coming up, just to put an exclamation point on a couple things Ron said. There's a lot of money flowing in education right now, federally, and then our state invested $150 million in this. So the key testable question that we were trying to consider is, how might we best understand? We've asked communities to be bold and innovative in their solutions, community partners with schools. How might we best understand what works and what didn't hit the mark so that we can scale and push more into what works? And then we can also share the models with other communities who are seeking very similar challenges and solutions. So again, these are two of several, but these are two exemplars in different parts of our state. So Brandon, if you could come up and share a little bit more about what you learned. right here in Marion County.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm with the Mind Trust. We are a locally based education nonprofit that has a mission to ensure that all kids in our city have access to a great school. In all of my years doing this work, this is the most exciting program that we've had the ability to operate. You all have heard now for 3 years, most of you are educators, that it's been a challenging 3 years for schools, right? And there's been a lot of really negative news relative to academic achievement. And I'm just incredibly excited that we have some good news to share today. And it's a result of, I think, very massive investments at the state level, and then a local community coming together across sectors to really figure out how can we collectively work together for kids. So I could probably speak for 3 hours, and I'm going to try to limit it to 5. At the Mind Trust, almost 3 years ago, so in the summer of 2020, if you can kind of, reimagine that time, it was clear that schools were probably going to open largely virtual. And many families started coming to us saying, we need a safe, nurturing place for our kids to be able to access virtual learning during the day because we still have jobs. Our team really thought about how can we work with existing community partners to open up what we then called community learning sites, which were local nonprofit organizations that could open up during the school day and provide support to ensure that as many students as possible could access high quality virtual learning while many of our schools in our city were not open. So we worked around the clock to launch that, which resulted in 26 local organizations serving close to 1,000 students starting late in the summer, and then really for most of that 2020-21 school year. Then when we got to December, a lot of schools really started calling us saying, we know that our kids have experienced incredible amounts of learning loss. We are underwater. We know that we need some kind of high quality program for them over the summer. Is there any way that you all can help? So through some conversations with the United Way of Central Indiana, we thought about, could we think about the community learning site work and leverage that into a community-wide summer learning program that not only had sites at schools and school districts, but also had sites in the community as well. And around the same time, the legislature, was really trying to tackle this same problem, and we felt like, man, if there was some state resources available for programs just like this, where schools and communities can come together, we could really scale up the community learning sites work and serve a lot more students. And not just have a safe place for kids to learn, but really think about how can we intentionally accelerate learning, knowing that much of the emerging evidence at that point was very, very clear that marginalized kids in particular had lost a lot of learning, and it was up to communities to come together to really try to accelerate that. So we were incredibly grateful to receive an $11 million grant from 1008, which helped us immediately scale up what we were doing in the community to serve almost 3,000 students in year one at 38 sites across the kind of general community. It was 2 school districts, several charter schools, and a lot of local nonprofit organizations. And we felt like we saw a lot of real demand from families, and we felt like with the kind of in-house assessment that we were using, a lot of very promising results, which led us to think, okay, so this probably shouldn't just be a one-year thing. We were hearing from our state partners that this effort needs to be a multi-year, sustained, collaborative effort to really accelerate learning. So we said, okay, let's try this again for year 2, think about what we learned, hopefully serve more kids, make some tweaks, and then really rigorously analyze what are the results looking like on iLearn. So that then led into last summer, where we served significantly more students, over 5,000 students, the vast majority of whom were students of color, vast majority of whom were low income. And you can see up there the breakdown of school types and local nonprofit organizations, and really the same model. How do we ensure that kids have access to a high quality curriculum that is not just remediating, but truly accelerating and exposing students to on-grade level work, culturally relevant for a little bit over a month in a really sustained effort. a key piece of this model too was enrichment. So we didn't want to make this a full day of math and English. We wanted to make it fun for kids, and we wanted to give their families an incentive, right, to actually enroll their kids in a high-quality summer learning program. So over half of the time was enrichment that was specifically, kind of created at the site level with support, more so at the central level. So what we say is this is a rigorous but fun summer learning opportunity where kids can accelerate their learning, but also really enjoy themselves as well. So the results. This is a snapshot of the results in year 2. So we saw 25-point gains in English, 24-point gains in math, and then, as was mentioned, statistically significant increases in learning relative to where students were before the pandemic. So as Ron said, not just making learning gains, but accelerating learning gains at a pace that outpaced how students were doing prior to the pandemic. So truly, statistically accelerating student learning. We were very excited to see the in-house results, but we were ecstatic when we got the call about this study because it proved, at a research level with this data assessment that the in-house assessments that we were looking at matched what we saw on iLearn. So just incredibly excited about the results and incredibly thankful for the partnership with DOE as well. One question that we had is, okay, so we're seeing these results at the macro level. What about the subgroup level? So we really wanted to disaggregate the data. How are students of color learning? How about low-income students, et cetera? And across the board, we saw very similar results. So this proved to us that the kids that needed the intervention the most not only were participating at high levels in the program, but were showing incredibly promising results as well. Another question not up here that we asked ourselves is, what was the extent to which students made academic progress at school sites versus community sites? Our hypothesis here was, look, if we can do something and show meaningful results at sites of all types across the community, then we might have stumbled on something around how can schools and communities work together, to really accelerate learning. Oftentimes, from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., there's kind of a wall of separation between schools and communities. And what we found is that community sites made almost as much learning gains as school sites, within 2 or 3 percentage points. So that was a very exciting finding for us as well, and I think has future implications around how can nonprofit community organizations start to more closely work with schools, not just on enrichment activities, it's important, right? But how can they also be partners to accelerate learning? So we were really excited to see the community sites had almost the same results as school sites. And I mentioned this earlier, but one important design feature to us was not make this program purely remedial, but to really think about how do we accelerate learning. And I don't have to tell you all this, but all of the research says if we're not exposing students to on-grade level material, then they're never going to reach proficiency. So we did a lot of work at the beginning to select a curriculum that we felt had that level of rigor, and was also culturally responsive, knowing that we were serving a very racially diverse group of students. So the Lavinia group has what they call a RISE curriculum, which was tailored to be aligned to the Indiana state standards. And then they created an aligned internal assessment that we ensured all students took on the first day, and they also took on the last day, so that we had kind of live information that was aligned to state standards to see how students were doing prior to having data from iLearn. So 3 key levers that we think made this program a success and might be interesting to employ in new programs across the state. One is we really feel like we were able to empower families with the ability to choose what site worked for them. So maybe it was a community site that maybe had already run a program that that kid had experience with. Maybe they felt more comfortable at a school site, right? Thinking about what are the transportation barriers and what was the easiest way for a kid to get to a site. So the fact that we had sites all over the community at nonprofit organizations and schools, we think really empowered our families to make the choice that was right for them. Secondly, the fact that the Mind Trust and United Way worked with, well over 20 local community organizations in multiple school districts and charter schools meant that this was truly a community-wide effort, right? So all of the work was not on schools. It was not on school districts. It was not on the community. It was a joint effort where everybody felt like they had to be completely bought in for it to be successful. And then I mentioned this now twice, but high quality academics, right? The curriculum that we're using matters, and if we're not exposing students to on-grade level work, then we're never going to truly accelerate their learning. So we really feel like those three pillars were all core to the successes that we've seen for the past couple years. And then lastly, this is very exciting, you may have read this a few days ago. So the Indy Summer Learning Lab's work happened really quickly in the summer of 2021, and it got a lot of notice from across the country. So in the summer of 2022, New York City replicated the program to serve 15,000 students in New York City. That is now being replicated to eight new cities across the country with a significant national philanthropic investment, not just for students in Indianapolis, but for a lot of students in cities across the country.
Pause there. Sorry, I scared you. You
No, that's
jumped.
fine.
Indiana is always so humble in the people, but that right there is something that we as a board would never know, the general population would never know, that New York City copied Indianapolis's, Marion County's model, and is now scaling in other major cities across the nation. So again, congratulations to you for that, and getting the philanthropic support nationally to launch it, to make an impact for more kids.
And if you really think about, right, so it took the General Assembly to make this investment, and then it took the DOE to overnight run a process that worked with well over 100 local initiatives, and then it took a community to come together and figure out how can we work together so that all the kids in our community win, right? And then it took rigorous analyses to figure out, is this actually working, right? And now it's being replicated across the country. So I just think it's a great example of the state and local communities working in tandem to make sure that we have resources and real collaborative strategies to make sure that we're working with kids to accelerate learning, knowing that COVID had a super negative impact on so many kids. So I just think it's a great and inspiring example of how when we work together, we can really do amazing things, not just for kids in our communities, but really inspire leaders across the country. So I'll stop there, and really wanted to say thanks to Secretary Jenner and her team. They've been amazing to work with during this process. Thank you to our legislature. And I would be remiss if I didn't encourage our legislative leaders, if they're listening right now, to continue
They're
to
on break,
invest
so
in
we'll have to
programs
tell
like
them.
this that have proven results, because as the Secretary has said and her team, it's going to take several years of acceleration just to get back to where we were prior to COVID, and we know that that wasn't good enough. So it's going to take continued state investment for this stuff to work over time.
Any questions, comments from board members? Mr. Mapes?
How many students started the program and finished the program? I saw your number of 5,000. Did you have kids who dropped in and out of the program?
Yep, so that overall number remained constant. We had a little bit of turnover, but I think from day one to the last day, there was about a 90% retention rate.
Okay.
And then we
That's half
continued
of
to
summer
enroll kids all throughout the summer
And
as
then
well.
how many days were the
Yep,
kids there?
there were 25 instructional days.
25 instructional days, primarily June.
Yep, it runs from mid-June to late July.
So it's interesting, as we see other cities across our nation considering scaling this model, we've also met to determine how we might further scale that model if there are, rural, suburban, urban school corporations who are interested in partnering. So more to come on opportunities there.
And then was the assessment that you used, the formative assessment you used, is it state approved?
We didn't do any, this is, for those of you who don't frequently watch Indiana State Board of Education meetings, this is an inside joke. You can see Mr. Mapes You know, it's interesting. Brittany and Ron did an incredible job launching this and deploying this. One of the things we contemplated is we did not have an approved pre-post assessment for the summer. But after seeing some of the results that several of our community-based initiatives launched, maybe we should.
My non-approved assessment, as we looked at our data this week, is showing the very same thing.
Yeah.
We're showing
That's awesome.
great gains in mathematics. Our language arts scores aren't where they need to be right now, but the math gain from the pandemic is double digits across every grade level, which is really unique.
Fantastic.
I'd say so. That's the same thing that we're seeing with schools we support right now too, and I would also agree that it's particularly true in math. And why we only originally applied for 1 year was because we felt militant around we need to assess the extent to which this is working, and if it's not working, you know, then we should stop doing it.
Yeah.
And you know, I think having a state-aligned assessment at the beginning allowed us, you know, to get real-time information that led us to believe that it was working.
Which is neat.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
you can't do this, you can't start this work and not check in the middle
That's right.
Yep.
and figure out whether or not you're heading the right direction.
That's right.
And so imagine again, if the General Assembly is listening, which I think you heard me say, most of them are on break
Yeah,
now.
they're on vacation.
So, well, it'll take all of us to whisper in their ear when they're back. What an opportunity, what an interesting opportunity if we had rural, suburban, urban schools all lean in, use this model, let's try it at a larger scale, see if that works, where it hits the mark, where it doesn't, and then again, further deploy funds where it's working, where it's moving the needle for students. It's an interesting opportunity that we have as a state ahead, so more to come.
Well,
Anything else?
I would also
Mr. Mapes,
say-
go ahead and finish your.
I'd also say
yeah.
that, I mean, the kids you got, their parents are investing in education, they send them to you during the summer.
Sure.
The group that continues to lag behind is that group that only comes to school when it's the 180-day piece. And until we have something that mandates that kids who aren't at proficiency attend something during the summer and their parents realize the importance of that, we won't get the full impact that we probably need from this.
Yeah, and that could be I mean, you think about that, that could be a future state policy potential. I think if we run this, which in summer 2023, which we will again for sure in Marion County, if we have the investment we may deploy in other cities as mentioned, and we see that impact, that could be a potential policy that we consider to get students where they need to be. I know we have some board members online with thoughts and questions, also over here. Let me take care of in the room, and then I'll go to online, Dr. Ernest, and then Mr. Best.
First of all, congratulations, great job. The one thing I don't want to get lost that you said, because it's kind of like you said it, and then it's like, well, why don't we do that every day in school? But we don't. You said rigorous but fun.
Yep.
Right? And why don't we do that? And I know there's not a causality piece to that or data that we can piece to that, but we know that, right? And so I think that's an important, because sometimes, to Pat's point, sometimes they don't come to that stuff because all of a sudden I have hours of the same thing that I really didn't like before, right? And so if we make it relevant and we make it fun, then that goes together. And I just didn't want that to get lost because I appreciated that. And then one question, quick question.
Yep.
What would you do different? If you could, if the state legislature said, hey, here's another gazillion dollars, do it again, what would you do different?
Yeah. Man, a gazillion. No, I think 100 Blackman is actually a really good example. You know, thinking about what do nonprofit anchor institutions and communities already do well during the summer, and then how can we supplement rigorous learning in what they're already doing? So year one was a fire drill, and we pretty much said, here's the program, take it or leave it, because we felt like we had to control all the variables. Year two, we started saying, largely based on some feedback from local organizations, that look, as long as you're doing the 3 hours and 15 minutes of rigorous instruction with this pre-selected curriculum, with high quality certified teachers, you have the freedom to plan your day around that. And I think what happened in year 2 was there was much more investment from community organizations because they didn't feel like they had to change all of what they were doing. They were just modifying what they were doing to have a rigorous academic component to it. And I think families appreciated that too, right? Because many organizations like 100 Black Men have been running high quality summer opportunities for years, right? And they have incredibly great brands in our communities. So I think our big learning, and we're gonna continue to tweak this, is come alongside organizations that are already serving community as well and fuse the rigorous academics, but you know, have the humility to say we don't have to plan everything out for you.
Mr. Bass.
Yeah, so I'll echo Dr. Ernest a little bit. So first of all, thanks. And then my mind naturally goes to, if this worked really, really well in the summer with students who were far behind, economically disadvantaged, what might our results look like across the state if this was more the norm during the day and not? And then I've had the luxury over the last year or so being part of a group called Education Reimagined, which really starts to look at essentially what could a true learner-centered environment look like, which does include community organizations. So it's not just an extra summer program, but it's taking groups who are doing that work on the ground, like 100 Black Men, like Boys and Girls Clubs, like all those kind of organizations, saying, look, is there a way to fully integrate those within the education environment so teachers don't have to do everything? And a point about the engagement that you saw with the students, the retention rate, and the willingness to do the 3+ hours of really rigorous academic instruction, along with the fun, along with the things that were relevant to them. And I would argue that we have an opportunity as we look forward at all grade levels, right, as the legislature starts to give us some freedoms around diploma requirements and things like that. I don't want to lose this conversation in that discussion, because if that discussion turns purely academic and purely focused on inside the school walls, then we've lost an opportunity of learning off of something that says, look, what can you do with the most challenging student population you could possibly have? To Dr. May's point, is higher lack of, yes, there are engaged parents because they're choosing to send them there, but how do we leverage the rest of it? If that environment exists within the 180 days that everybody's required to do it, now you've got a chance to really make a difference. I think we have an opportunity as a state to lead in this. All the ingredients are there, and if the legislature comes through and gives us those kind of freedoms as a board to act, as a department to act, we can take learning off of this and say, like, we can fundamentally change what happens. And to our Butler students, I would say, really think through this as you head out into your teaching experiences. What could that be like if it wasn't just you in the classroom, but it was truly a community engagement, and you're a facilitator of learning, having students in and out with community in and out, and taking advantage of the lived experiences that our community partners have. So anyhow, I just think we have a great opportunity to take this investment, again, all the serendipitous things that came together with the legislature and the philanthropy and everybody else, and really take this and do something big with it.
And I'm going to ask Katie Mote if you could come off of mute, but to connect that point, Scott, Mrs. Tinkler, who just won that Milken Award at Rosa Parks Elementary School, had one of her really elements that made her special is, as an elementary teacher, she had so many community partners exposing students to different things. Again, I think a parent said this earlier, if you can't reach them, you can't teach them. So leveraging the community partners to really reach them is important. Mrs. Mote.
Thanks, Dr. Jenner. My mind is going on a couple different places, so I have a question, but then some follow-up comments based on what Dr. Ernest and Dr. Bess shared. One observation and affirmation is we know that there are moments in the school day that kids have that are more relevant and fun than others. And typically that's activity, project, problem-based learning, or places where the teacher is in the role of facilitator. So I think there's a thread to pull on applied math, generally speaking. and what can and does that look like for the purpose of remediation and acceleration. So just wanted to affirm that, and feels like a great opportunity that shouldn't be as maybe pockets of those types of experiences as maybe students are experiencing them today. So continuing to have affirmation of the way that relevance, the hands-on learning, drives deeper retention and engagement and understanding. The other push and wonder I have is how similar or dissimilar, I don't know, and I think it looks different. The Boys and Girls Club in Zionsville, Indiana may be a different after-school experience than a different location. There's an unevenness of what it is like to engage in outside of school learning, depending on the resources, the staff to student ratio, right? All of those pieces. Because that's true, how might we reimagine the role of facilitator? If we're really going to scale and have impact in these after school settings more broadly, do we have an appetite? What might it look like for the facilitator to not be a certified teacher? That feels like something we're going to have to solve for if this is going to scale in the way that we want it to. And what could that look like? So I'm curious if there's any initial thinking about that, or challenge, or sort of disagreement, but that the environment will be different. The other feedback in the visits I've been doing recently out to community providers like those that you mentioned and in schools is some feedback from those providers that they have a hard time getting kids to do school outside of school. If we're thinking again about expanding beyond the population that has had this opportunity right now. So if that's true, then how might that even need to look more different if it's scaled beyond the population that's been targeted for this first cohort?
And I think I'll let Brandon respond, and then Ms. Hamill is gonna go next. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, so I'll be really quick. That was an excellent observation, and it's something that we've thought a lot about. So specifically in small community sites, since this was serving 1st through 9th graders, it was oftentimes hard to get a cohort of students in one grade level. So what we had to do, which we're gonna move away from, but what we had to do at first, is have the certified teacher delivering instruction virtually, and then we had a facilitator, kind of on the ground working with students. Many times that facilitator already had relationships with kids. So we were able to leverage existing staff at community partners and members of our community to lean into the learning process while still having the certified teacher ultimately responsible. And we've learned a lot from that approach, and we'll continue to modify, but I think your point is exactly right. How do we build capacity within communities so that we're just not relying on certified teachers?
Mrs. Hamill.
I think one thing that comes to mind when we talk about this, and Katie, I'm 100% in agreement, applied learning where it's student-centered and project-based is the way to go. We work with a lot of teachers across the state, and the training that's happening in pre-service teaching programs needs to move in that direction in a strong way. So what is there that we could do, or how do we take an assessment of what's happening in pre-service training? But then more importantly, how do we shore up the teachers that are already in the field to help them not feel threatened by going to becoming a facilitator versus the sage on the stage? I see so many schools with so many rules and regulations and all these pressures that are put on kids, and it just ruins learning. And it's because there isn't a trust that is built as I'm a facilitator walking beside you and I'm a collaborator in the classroom with you versus the policeman. And so I think those are two areas when we think about helping teachers in our state and then helping pre-service teachers really understand what that looks like, because there is not enough PD out there right now to help teachers move in that direction.
And it's also not something that as a country and state we've really recognized that scale. And when we have accountability looking like check A, B, C, D on a test and not evaluating learning and skills through more of a project-based learning avenue at scale, you feel locally as a teacher the pressure to do that. So again, going back to, I think that all of these points connect, and going back to Scott's point, what an opportunity we have as a board coming up with the flexibility that we hope the General Assembly provides for us to really look at this a little bit differently. And we might be one of the few first states to do that, but someone's got to lead on this, and I think it easily could be and should be us. Thank you, Brandon. It sounds like you could have gone for 3 hours. We probably could have gone for 3 hours too. Let's go ahead and shift over to another best practice. St. Joseph County, if you're familiar with University of Notre Dame, if you're familiar with South Bend, that's St. Joseph County, the top of our state. Jacqueline is in Washington, D.C. at the National Boys and Girls Club Conference. She's actually presenting there. So they shifted her schedule today to allow her to also share with us as a state board. So she's going to join us online. And board members, you do have that presentation on the screen as well as in front of you.
Well, good morning, Dr. Jenner. My name is Jacqueline Cronk. I'm the CEO up in St. Joseph County in South Bend. Grateful to be here. Again, apologies for not being able to be in person. We are here in DC and meeting with our federal legislators to also advocate for our kids and funding to help sustain our work and what we do. So I just want to thank Dr. Jenner, Ron, Brittany for the Herculean task of distributing these resources, and I think really specifically allowing us the opportunity to think boldly and casting that vision of what we could do in order to get our kids where the investments that we really think that they deserve and need. We say so often at the Boys and Girls Clubs that when kids walk through our doors that we are acknowledging them for their gifts and their potential rather than any perceived deficiencies or circumstances. And the House Bill 1008 allowed us to more than triple our footprint up in St. Joseph County, and we are really excited to share with you kind of the results after year one. So if you go to the next slide, after year one, or actually to date, we have served just over 3,000 students, K through 12, at soon to be 27 sites. We have 22 sites currently right now, and this was a 3-hour in-person learning program with students splitting their time between remediation and enrichment. And I want to go back to a couple tenets that were brought up. The Boys and Girls Club, we do after-school programming really well, and we have confidence in that, great confidence. This was, the academic recovery aspect of us was a stretch, and so we kind of brainstormed and created this 4 kind of pillar program of literacy, math fluency, social emotional learning, and then college and workforce readiness. Again, particularly to combat the pandemic learning loss. What does that look like? So it's individualized literacy and math instruction aligned to the academic standards, but also an entrepreneurship program aligned through RISE in Indiana's employability standards. And then really we know in working with children that we need to address the whole child. And so we have done a lot of work in our social emotional learning, particularly with a focus on prevention and teaching our kids the ability to self-regulate before trauma has occurred. This program is offered to our families free of cost, no cost to our families. It's 5 days a week, again, a 3-hour in-person learning program. And then we also run a 7 full-day summer camp at 9 locations. This funding allowed us to operate full days, Monday through Thursday from 8 to 6 for our families. We collaborated with over 20 different partners to introduce our kids from catching fish out in the wilderness to lacrosse to boxing, and really what we tried to do is tie in our literacy and our math fluency programming and enrichments to those activities. So you've got that competency-based learning, that project-based learning where the kids can connect the dots of, okay, what are the fractions if I catch 1 fish today out of how many, a total number, and really trying to connect the dots both in the morning and the afternoon. We did partner with 5 school districts in our county, and really put a lot of intentionality, if you go to the next slide, of identifying our locations where there are food and childcare deserts. So really focused on kids who need us the most. 74% of those that we serve across the county are on free or reduced lunch. 36% qualify for food stamps. A majority of our families are members of our communities of color, and a lot of our kids also come from single-parent households. We do have a high population of unhoused children that we serve. We hold spots for those, again, because those are the ones that have the more often than not, the greatest need, both academically and social and emotionally. Please keep in mind that we are coming from districts where 90% of kids started one or more grade levels behind when we rolled out in August of 21. And because of that, we're really excited to share the impact that we had after year one. If you go to the next slide. This is the piece that we are really excited about. We are using this data based on our iReady. Majority of the districts up by us use iReady, except Mishawaka's HMH. But after year one, we saw that just over 64% of our kids gained one or more grade levels in literacy. We more than tripled the number of kids on or above grade level in that category. And then math, 68% of our kids gained one or more grade levels in math, and we nearly quintupled, and that is a fun word to use, quintupled the number of kids that are on or above grade levels. Start from, again, this is beginning of year to end of year one. And then 20% of our kids gained two or more grade levels in both literacy and math. The interesting part about Strive in this program is that it's for everyone. When we dive a little bit deeper into the data of those 3,000 students, the high-performing kids that we also serve that were above grade level also were rising. And what we found is it allowed, we operate in cohorts, so a 1-to-10 ratio between our youth development professionals and our students, that when we had kids that were below grade level working with kids who were at above grade level, that they both rose. And that was the most fascinating piece. I think one of the takeaways for us is that this program is for everyone. And we feel confident that we are the reason why the high-performing kids are staying where they are. And these leadership opportunities and the ability to create that community amongst your cohort is really powerful. And this is in a time period where, the media is measuring a 20-year loss of gain in both literacy and math. If we can show significant grade level recovery across all 5 districts, and this is a key tenet as well, is we are serving both urban and rural. We're up in, we're in the heart of South Bend, downtown, but then we're down in Walkerton and North Liberty, where it's a drastically different population. And so our curriculum is resonating across those demographics, and we're really excited about that. If you go to the next slide. I think obviously the year one results are really exciting, but it's also given us this incredible momentum and this opportunity for us to, we're just getting started. We have, entering into year 2, we have a customized RV mobile makerspace that will allow us to continue to bring the STEM curriculum across all of our sites in the county. Not all of our sites are created equal, so some of them have more resources than others. And so we thought creatively, and we partnered with the private sector to create this mobile makerspace lab that we could bring to all of our sites. It's a rolling-based curriculum so that each one of our kids gets the exact same amount of exposure, again, focusing on that equity piece. We also have, through, again, the private sector, we're able to bring in a clinical psychologist to our team to further our social emotional learning kind of efforts. I think mental health for our young people is at a critical point that we have to address immediately. And again, ours is all about prevention. So it's implementing universal screeners for our kids as soon as they start with us, being able to flag kids who may not be articulating what's going on and getting them and referring them to our partners, whether it's Oaklawn or some of the other mental health providers. Dr. Kelsey, our staff psychologist, is able to do some analysis, whether it's IEPs, and really expedite, obviously the schools right now are inundated and the turnaround time is on average 6 to 7 months, but for Dr. Kelsey, she can turn those around in 7 days. And so to provide those resources for our kids, that added variable of support, it's really important because I think the Boys and Girls Club can be the liaison between the school and the families. families feel comfortable at the Boys and Girls Club. And if we can help foster that dialogue and that connection between the great work that's happening during the school day and our team coming in and complimenting what teachers are doing, that open dialogue and communication is absolutely critical. Dr. Kelsey is also piloting a new program with a company called Mightier, where it's a video game that our kids can check out. They wear a little wrist bracelet, and they can, in order to continue to play the video game, they have to be able to self-regulate and lower their heart rate or increase their heart rate. And it really is giving our kids, the knowledge to know that they are in control. And that confidence and continuing to flex that muscle as much as they can to strengthen it. And we're really excited about that. We also, through these partnerships, particularly with Career and Success Academy up in South Bend, we were able to create this hands-on work-based learning experience and increase pathways in engineering and business and precision machining and giving our kids, we've got a partnership with Notre Dame where it's a hospitality program where our kids go for a 10-week program and get experience in all the different areas of the university, work on their resume, their job skills, and then at the completion of the program, they are offered employment at the University of Notre Dame at a higher rate of pay. And so really continuing to find ways that we can be the equalizer so that all kids get exposure and opportunities to these programs. And then lastly, the one that we're really excited about, again, this partnership and this collaboration between the schools. I would love that the Mind Trust focused on that because we're finding the same thing is when we're all heading in the same direction with a clear vision of what's possible, amazing things happen. And so we are, our main flagship site in South Bend really is used for after-school programming, and we had this amazing community resource that was sitting empty during the day. And so we are working with Success Academy. They're going to start a new K-5 school at the Boys and Girls Club, piloting a 4-day experiential learning school for 150 K-5 students with an emphasis on competency-based learning. And but the most exciting piece about that is we have found, and I think, Katie, to your point, how can we think outside the box in facilitating this instruction? Our youth development professionals, our frontline staff, we are going to enter in a co-teaching partnership alongside them. So they are in the classroom with a certified teacher, facilitating the curriculum, getting that exposure, understanding. We're going to train them in Orton Gillingham. We're going to, give them the tools that they need to help bring those ratios down as much as possible, have that relationship with our kids. As you guys all know, relationships matter. And so to be able to use our staff that's with the kids after school and the fun piece in the Boys and Girls Club, and then have them be in the classroom as well, that continuity, that support, those wraparounds really allow our kids the opportunity to thrive. And really the Success Academy is also giving our kids exposure to different career pathways earlier. We're finding that, if you're a student of color, by the time you hit 6th, 7th, 8th grade, if you're not thinking about STEM or career in that area, you're never going to think about it. And so how can we bring those opportunities to our kids earlier and give them, the days of sitting in a classroom for 7 hours are over. Like, what kids need to be out in the community, seeing and touching and feeling and understanding what's possible and what these careers pathways look like and what they need to do to get there. If you go to the next slide, I think the year in our pilot year, our first year, we have a lot of key takeaways. We, as the Boys and Girls Club, we are constantly looking at ways we can iterate and evolve and improve. And the key variables for us is we've really been able to retain our staff. The program that I outlined, the Dr. Kelsey, the staff psychologist, she's also providing those same supports to our staff. And that's critically important, is our youth development professionals are often from the same socioeconomic backgrounds. That makes them so great at connecting with their kids, but they also need the supports. The pandemic was hard on everyone, teachers and staff and administrators. So continue to be mindful of that. The evolution of our curriculum, how can we really laser in and focus on the pieces that work, that are effective, and how can we adjust the ones that are not? How can we maintain that this program is fun? Learning needs to be fun for kids. And how can we adjust evaluation process so that we're not surveying and testing our kids constantly, but we can use the data sharing agreement that this funding, I mandated, honestly, I think this is the most important aspect of this funding, was the data sharing agreement. For the first time ever, as a leader of an organization, we were in an informed partner, not only with the behavioral issues, with their report cards, it felt like we had these kids, the ones who need us most, had a team wrapped around them, and that was absolutely critical. And I cannot express the magnitude of importance that allowed us to have. And it allowed us to create a partnership with the principals and the teachers that we're serving that felt like they have additional supports too. And if they have a child that they need to refer to us, or Johnny's really struggling in X, Y, and Z, or Sally has experienced a traumatic event, we know we need to wrap around them tight right now. That is something that we're really grateful for as well. And then lastly, we have an opportunity now after year one. Because we serve 1,700 kids in the summer, some of which did not participate in our Strive programming. If we have another additional year, or ideally future years, we can do some serious regression analysis on the exact efficacy of this program, and where we need to improve, where we need to adjust, and how we can continue to elevate the impact. And so, the funding that is provided to us has allowed all of those opportunities to come to light. And the last slide that I'll share is the number that keeps me up at night. As of this morning, we have 632 kids on our wait list hoping to participate in our programming. And the demand for our services, the need for our services, for high quality after-school programming that has the academic recovery aspect, but also has the enrichment that is really servicing the kids that are behind and the kids who are thriving. The funding that you've allocated to this allowed us to do that, and to continue to explore and ideate and work along great partners like Mind Trust will allow us to, again, set our students up to succeed and continue to show them what's possible. So we just want to end on gratitude and the bold vision that Dr. Jenner has set and allowed us to take some risks with this and really continue to evolve.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, very much for presenting, especially being in DC, and I know having another presentation yet today. Any comments or questions from the board?
I just want to say, as a partner in the community with Jacqueline, it's just been an absolute pleasure. And I think the biggest advantage I see from a community standpoint is we are actually having the conversation about what's best for kids. The egos are gone, the politics are gone, and because Boys and Girls Club is so involved as a neutral partner, we can all dock in and do the work for kids, which has been just such a refreshing place to be. So,
great point. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Jacqueline, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your time in DC and safe travels home. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Nancy Holsapple, can you give us an update on our special education child count?
Well, good morning, everyone. And what I'm going to share with you is nothing as exciting as those presentations. But what I'm going to share today, a year ago, we shared with you what we were predicting we were going to see from the pandemic. And the data I'm going to share today pretty much will tell us that we were accurate. So we're going to talk about the data. We're going to reiterate the developmental delay definition, and then we're going to talk about the impacts from COVID-19 on special education. The student data, so Indiana's population of students receiving special education services has experienced a modest increase in the recent years, and you can see from our 2017-18 data to 22-23. And I want to share that Brandon Myers, who is my data specialist, he collects this data and he analyzes it for us, so he is a great asset to my team. The next slide is the adjusted pupil count, or APC. It reflected the increase in Indiana's special ed student population between the annual fall ADM in September and then December 1 count. With the exception of 2020, due to the COVID-19, the APC is experiencing steady growth. So this year, from our December 1 count, we recorded 188,887 students. Compared to a year ago, we had 183,266 students identified. So we had an increase of 5,621 students identified. The primary disability trends that we're seeing in the APC data, it shows the strongest growth is in the developmental delay, other health impairment, and autism spectrum. The data also shows a relative decline in our moderate intellectual disability, emotional disability, and orthopedic impairment. And in those three top categories, the developmental delay, we had an increase of 854 students. But the two largest, the other health impairment, we had an increase of 1,364 students. And then with autism, we had an increase of 1,184 students identified. And we were actually surprised about the decline in emotional disability because we keep hearing from schools about behaviors and the mental health. So we're going to track that data for future reference. In case everyone is not familiar with the definition of developmental delay, so it defines as either a delay in gross or fine motor, cognitive, receptive, or expressive language, social or emotional development, or self-help or other adaptive developments. This is our fastest growing special ed category for Indiana's students. So when this was first expanded in 2018 to the age of 8, we had 2,171 students identified. To date, we now have 10,617 students in this disability category. So in 2018, when that law expanded, it increased those numbers. Previously, it was restricted to our students younger than kindergarten, and the category is growing rapidly because the students can't continue to receive services until the age of 8. Prior to 2018, what happened was if the student was coming out of developmental disability delay preschool, we had to evaluate them. If they did not meet the category criteria, then they were dismissed from special education. And then they became what we call the struggling students because they didn't qualify. They weren't always getting the services. By expanding to age 8, those students continue to get the services that they need, so when they are reevaluated at age 8, they may not exhibit a disability because they've made up the difference and they no longer qualify under Article 7. Here, the graph shows how the past year there was an increase in language speech impairment from 5,716 to 6,178. So we had an increase of 462 students identified in the language speech. So what we have seen from COVID-19 impact on special education, so those students who were identified for special education and they were receiving services at the preschool level during the pandemic, most probably everybody in here saw that when schools opened back up, it was virtual, it was, a combination. Many of our parents elected not to send their very young children to school. So our overall preschool enrollment declined, and you could see that on the graph. It was dramatic. Now, parents are bringing their children back. We are evaluating these little ones, so our numbers of preschool are going back up. And remember, those numbers fluctuate from Part C, which is our first steps, to Part B. It's based off of their 3rd birthday. So those numbers go up and down every month. The long-term impacts that we saw, that more students were in need of special ed services, are likely to be identified later in childhood, which is what we are seeing with the increase in our numbers. The evaluation numbers are going up, and what we're also seeing is that the academic impact from limited early interventions will need to be addressed as the students age up through elementary grades. So our students who would have typically been in our developmental preschool, they were not attending. Parents elected not to send them. So some of these students who should have been in our preschool between the ages of 3 to 5, they are now getting their first exposure kindergarten, 1st grade. So there is that gap, the academic impact on those kids. So we're likely to see an increase in these students as in the numbers of students identified as they have more exposure to school. I think you were shared these 2 charts last month, but you could see the increase, the greatest increase is in our other health impairment. And for your information, it means having limited strength, vitality, alertness, including a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli that results in limited alertness with respect to the education environment. It can be due to chronic or acute health problems, asthma, ADHD, ADD, diabetes, epilepsy, just to name a few of what a health condition could be for a student that qualifies under health impairment. As you can see, those numbers are increasing. Our preschool numbers, we had an increase, and the largest number, you can see developmental delay again, and then our language speech impairment, and then the numbers of students identified on the autism spectrum keep increasing as well.
Well, thank you, Dr. Holsapple, for the special education update. Do we have any questions, comments from board members? I'm looking at you, Dr. Ernest. I know this is one of your interesting areas.
I just appreciate you walking through this. I think that's important for us to not just be, you all know I like for data to tell a story, and you were able to tell a story with it, and I appreciate that because you highlighted the things that we needed to do. So since she called on me, though, I will ask, what keeps you up at night about this now for schools?
Our one, staff shortage. I heard earlier, you know, we're still trying to be creative through the ISO program, and as of yesterday, we had 757 participants in that. And then in our non-traditional asset program, we have 100 participants in that. So that, you know, not having certified staff, and then the academic impact. Because of that gap and the kids who probably needed the most support and education, those students probably were not getting it. So trying to close that gap and get our students to where they need to be. Overall, you know, when I shared things with Dr. Jenner, when I talked to other state directors, Indiana is one of the states in the forefront on how we address our percentage of students in the general ed classrooms. Indiana's in the top 5, but they're in those gen ed classes. What are we doing with those kids in those gen ed classes? You know, the support's going in there, making sure those things are happening. So that's what keeps me up.
Are we able to, you made me think of, in some of these programs that we've done through 1008 and those other things, have we been able to support this subgroup of students? Do we know what's that data look like from that? And I may have missed, well, I didn't miss it in the one where it subbed it out, but overall, are we able to make up some of those differences with some of that?
Yes, and there's a chart in the 1008 presentation that shows we're serving,
Right.
here it is, a higher percentage, right, of special education students. And I think that that's a student population that in the report coming out in August, or in the summer, that we'll hear more about the impacts.
I think the easy piece of fruit is make kindergarten mandatory. I mean, if we're doing science or reading, we want to get kids ready to go, we're talking about readiness, it's still an option. And while it's an option, our worst attendants are our kindergarten kids, the ones who need to be there the most. And I agree, we're seeing so much more special ed services K-1 because we did lose them during the pandemic.
Yeah,
We fund it, we just don't make it mandatory.
right. Any other thoughts, questions? Dr. Holsapple, thank you very much. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Aye.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.